what people need to understand with a hybrid is that it absolutely needs a nurseryman or somebody to move it along the commercial chain. It's no good having a lovely plant in your garden and saying what a beautiful grevillea unless you make that connection and make arrangements for it to be cultivated. Because you might think it's worth a lot of money, but the people that do all the work also think that, and it is a lot of work to propagate up a large number of plants and then put them in the wholesale market and then the wholesale market into the retail market. So it doesn't always happen that the most beautiful plants get into cultivation, sadly. There are different types of Grevillea hybrid. Now, I'm following on from a talk that was given in 2007 by Merv Hodge on Grevillea hybrids, which was very popular at the time. And here we are 14 years later, then trying to get that into a concise subject is much more difficult now because there have been released and continue to be released new ones. And you would ask the question, as I often do, why do we grow Grevillea hybrids rather than Grevillea species? Because we're about appreciating our natural environment. But the reality is that we're outweighed by the number of people who just want garden plants. And we're very privileged to be able to give them native garden plants because they do interface with the environment somewhat better than exotic plants. They provide food and habitat for a raft of insects and birds, and thus we feel that we're justified in continuing the presentation of plants for horticulture. We used to be known as the Australian Society for Growing Australian Plants, and hybridism was a very important part of that. And so this whole subject is contained within that line of thinking. There are different types of hybrids. Most people just think, you know, what's that little seedling that's come up in my garden, and grow it on. And sometimes if they're connected to a nursery, it might make it to the general gardens and horticulture of the other people in the world, including mostly in Australia, of course. You might be interested to know that the Americans have banned the importation of grevilleas, not because they're an environmental weed, but because there was an insect pest, which is an environmental problem over there, found on a cultivated plant in South America. And to deal with that, they banned all Grevillea hybrids, or grevilleas actually, not hybrids, all grevilleas in the United States. Been in place for quite a number of years. And in fact, it has impacted on a study that was underway in Western Australia, whereby a couple of nurseries were involved with Kings Park, funding a huge effort to produce new Grevillea hybrids. And I had a look at those plants that they were producing, and they were just absolutely fabulous because they were using the genetics from all the genus from all over Australia, and not only just using pollen, they were gene splicing and doing all other techniques that the average person is not able to do. So it was a bit of a sad case, but as I will tell you later, some of the benefit of that is now flowing to us because prior that study prevented any of those plants being sold in Australia. They were entirely for the American market. So we're going to get the benefit of that. So the average hybrid is, you know, in your garden is what we call a volunteer. It just pops up. It's serendipitous. The parentage is usually pure guesswork, still is. We can infer because of the morphology, but by and large, the the parentage is usually complete guesswork. And notwithstanding the value of the plant, the problem with those sort of plants is that we do not know the parentage, therefore we don't know how to cultivate them properly. All we do know is that they're there. The second way is the way that is encouraged and will be encouraged in this talk, as much as I can, and that is whereby people select the parent of the plant and they deliberately go about transferring the pollen to the pistil, saving the seed, and assessing the plant in some kind of scientific way. That is a way in which we know the parents, or we assume the parents, we know the parents have done their job, assuming we've got the pollination right, and that provides us not only with the ability to grow the plants properly or graft them even, but if we use plants from overseas or other parts of Australia, we can introduce new genes that have never been used in the breeding of plants. So we get a huge range. And those plants can then be bred back from again and again and again. And this is what was going on at Kings Park. You know, the plants they were using from East Coast and West, or Western Australia, which are often denied to us because of our ability or inability to grow them. They've got them there and they use them widely, and then they breed back to the East Coast for hardiness. Then they breed back to a plant for its size and so they develop a plant that is suitable for horticulture. You know, we don't want all our plants to be 15 feet high because it's a grevillea. What we want are plants that fit our gardens. So we design them, and this designation is a great skill and something to be applauded, I think, rather than just a serendipitous seedling that just pops up in your garden. Not that there's anything wrong, but you can see the advance, scientific advance, the horticultural skills, all the things that go with developing a hybrid under those circumstances. And one of the problems with that is that when you cross a plant from Eastern Australia with a plant from Western Australia, we're talking grevilleas, so we took that. When you do that, the immediate result is infertility. And so if you've got up a breeding program whereby you're crossing plants and then you're waiting for the seed and then you grow the seed and then you recross it again with something else, your plans come immediately to a halt. You cannot get any seed out of a plant that's infertile. So while that is a very advantageous situation in ecology, it does prevent plants from spreading like weeds. In breeding, it's a disaster. So we have to go to other methods of breeding, or secondary breeding and tertiary breeding, to get the genes into another plant. And again, then we're ramping up the technology markedly. And the only person that I know that's really capable of doing that, it'll be the last person we talk about today, will be Digby Grounds from Kings Park, which is what they were doing over in Western Australia before the Americans slapped an import ban on Grevillea, which still stands, by the way. The other thing that's emerging is that a large number of our plants now are being grafted. It's a skill that doesn't come naturally to people because, you know, it's a slightly advanced technique, but it improves greatly the life of a plant in the garden. And so increasingly, and we in the Grebelia study group, which we've just started up again in New South Wales, are addressing this with showing people how to graft their plants, easy ways to graft them, what to graft them onto, and how to go about growing your own plants, because if you buy a PBR plant, you can graft that yourself, you can repropagate that, but you can't commercialise it. You have to do it yourself. And that is what the plant protection is for, to stop people multiplying plants for sale that deny the owner of the plant some royalty. So the person that learns how to graft is in a very advantageous position, because a lot of the new plants, especially not just grevilleas, Banksias particularly, but plants that are difficult to grow, if you find the right rootstock, you are able to successfully grow them here in wetter climates and unsuited climates, and in soils that are not good for plants to grow in. East Coast soils have fungi and nutrients that are not always suited to plants from Western Australia, for example. So, grafting them is a very important method. The most important grevillea for grafting is Grevillea robusta. Now, Grevillea robusta has a number of very interesting features. It's a very hardy plant. It's a tree. We don't want trees in our backyard, but a tree is a much sturdier rootstock than a shrub, generally speaking. And the other thing about Grevillea robusta is that it's non-selective, because there is no Grevillea ever known to have hybridized with it. So it doesn't play favourites. And if it's compatible with a plant, it's likely to be very successful, to be grown in your garden 20, 30 or 40 years, which is long enough, probably outlive you. And it's very readily available. It's another thing, is that it drops seed everywhere, actually a bit of environmental weed in some places, of course, but it can easily be gathered and grown up into something that is cheap and easy to obtain. And while we do look for other rootstocks as well, they're not so robust. Grevillea robusta will tolerate the weather we're having now, as well as droughts, as well as lots of other issues. It's a tough plant in wind and exposed sites, and is very tolerant of soil differences, although it doesn't particularly like calcium. So alkaline soils are not to its advantage. Now, I've mentioned the importance of the nursery industry, and most of the people I'm going to feature here, certainly in the latter part of the talk, are nursery people actually who started out just grafting grevilleas, many of them. I have them there for years, but also had a lot that died. And over in Western Australia, there's another lookalike, and it's a plant called Claire D. A nurseryman at Xanthorea Nursery named it after his daughter. Now, that's a much more robust plant than Robin Gordon, even though it looks similar. The pod parent is Grevillea banksii, which is a much taller plant than Biponata. And so this is a much more robust plant. So but the thing is, it's flowers beautifully and has pale green foliage, which makes a difference. And if you can get hold of that and you've got room to grow it, it's a really excellent plant for the garden. A couple of plants that were around in 2007, Grevillea Misty Pink, and the best one, I think, both of these are good, Honey Gem. I think that's probably one of the pick of the grevilleas. It's still one of the hardiest and one of the most unusual, robust, good screen, bird attractor, and so on. And in the 70s, of course, we had Sylvia, which was promoted by a nursery up in Queensland, Majestic, which got into the nursery trade, grew up in horticulture, and Sunset Bronze. I can't remember how that goes. You'll have to read my book when it comes out. And that's a beautiful, it's a seedling of Honey Gem. So there are a lot of seedlings of Honey Gem. It's a good breeding parent. And this is a bit of a tribute to my mate, Merv Hodge, who passed away a couple of years ago. I've listed all the plants that he was responsible for getting into horticulture. The plants that got an asterisk beside them weren't his, but he found them and brought them along, and other people's plants that he promoted and brought into horticulture at that time, a very significant thing to do. He bred, the first plant he bred was this, Grevillea superb. And Phil Keane, the nurseryman, thinks that Merv named it after him, but that's not the case, Phil. And superb differs from Robin Gordon. It's a much paler one, and you'll see the tips of the flowers are yellow. Sorry, I've skipped over. I don't think I can skip back. Another two that came up, Goliath, one on the left, which looks red, but it actually is very, very deep pink, and Fire Sprite on the right. Another one that Merv didn't quite get it, and he brought Fire Sprite right into cultivation, and then a couple of years later he said, I've got a better one, a better Fire Sprite. I go, well, you have to call it something else. He said, no, we'll just call it Fire Sprite 2. I said, Merv. I said, what's the difference? I can't see any difference. He said, oh, well, Fire Sprite 2's got 5 lobes on the leaf instead of 3. I go, I don't think that's a big problem, Merv. I don't know where that's going. You don't see them now. Another person that isn't well known, but was responsible for breeding a really large number of Grevilleas in the Coastal series. And his name was Owen Brown. And he passed away from cancer. Actually, he had cancer while he was developing all these hybrids. He had a little backyard. It was only a very small backyard, and he had pots all around the edge, the back, instead of a garden. And what he did was he'd go out and pollinate different plants, and he'd be patient enough to mark the seed and then get the seed to germinate, and then he would wait for it to flower and put it in another pot, and then he would go through, and he had a rather advanced imagination, because some of the colours that he could see, even when I was looking at it, I was struggling. But Coastal Sunset was one of his real winners. And I can remember Merv saying that they got that into the Nielsen's nursery up in Brisbane there, and as soon as they got 20 in, they'd be out the door in no time. So sadly, though, you don't see it anymore. I mean, I never see that in any nursery, and part of the problem is that these tropical grevilleas sometimes are quite difficult to propagate, sadly. They might actually graft better. And so, like a study group, people that have got these they're readily able to come and take cuttings and graft it and get it going again. So as long as we don't lose them, then there's some hope. Down the right is a thing called Coastal Dawn. Coastal Prestige, and Caloundra Gem was one of his early ones. And as you can see, there's quite a large number there. One of the last ones that he developed was a plant that he called Judith Ann after his daughter. And he sold it, it's the one on the bottom there, to a person who thought that it should be renamed after their granddaughter, and they named it Molly, and he was heartbroken. And of course, you still buy it now as Grebelia Molly. It's quite a good Grevillea. Looks a bit like Robin Gordon, but there are perceivable differences to most nurserymen and horticulturists. And of course, Golden Yulo was another one. It was named after an Aboriginal. He took the Aboriginal word Yulo, which was for beauty. I think that was what it was for. And he called Golden Yulo and Crimson Yulo. And Golden Yulo was a very, very popular plant in around 2000 when the Olympics were on, and was used in the bouquets. But again, you don't see it very often now. Oh, dear, oh dear. I did want to talk about those, but I can't go back, I don't think. Fair Hill Nursery developed Crowning Glory and Golden Lyre. Beautiful grevilleas. They are really stunning grevilleas. I went up there to talk to them and have a look at their plants, and they had this Crowning Glory there. and they had decided not to do anything with it. And I said, why wouldn't you do that? I mean, you've got a yellow one, but this is like a coppery, it's a lovely, lovely plant with massive big flowers. Oh, no, 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 we don't want to do that. So, well, can we take cuttings? Yeah, sure, you take cuttings. So we took cuttings and we got it going. And I've never been gladder in my life that I did that. They developed a number of other grevilleas there, one on the right called Ninderry Gold, another one Ninderry Sunrise, and the one in the middle there called Velvet Carpet, which I'm showing you because it's completely prostrate plant. Obviously, it's got Grevillea calei in it, and it was on their catalogues, but I never ever saw it until I went to Jim and Fran Standing, who were Grevillea study group people from northern New South Wales, and Fran Standing just passed away the other day. And they had this plant in their garden, and I go, what's that? And they told me, and I said, don't lose it. Make sure we get that going. And it's an absolutely beautiful plant. It's got soft, soft leaves and weepy, soft branches. So it's a lovely cascading plant. And I'm hopeful. I've just got 2 plants of that through the help of one of the Queensland members, Helen Howard, and she's grafted it. So hopefully we'll be able to see more of that plant. Isn't it a shame I can't go back? This is Amber Blaze. Now, Fairhill at the same time developed Amber Blaze, which they decided to do something with. And I can tell you that the popularity of this plant is enhanced greatly by a single plant in the nursery at Heathcote, Forest Native Nurseries, Sydney Wildflower Nursery as it's now known, at Heathcote. They've got one in their display garden in the middle of the nursery, and almost to a person they go, have you seen that? What's that plant? Who grows that? Can you get that plant for me? It's just so popular. And Amber Blaze, that's it there. It's a lovely spreading plant, and you need to have a bit of room for it. You need to make it a centerpiece of your lawn and then let it grow. Just a lovely, lovely plant. And then Mr. Handsome, Peter Ollerenshaw, I haven't put his year of death because he's still going. And Peter is a breeder of the cold climate grevilleas. He lives near Canberra, and a lot of his stuff grows in that cold climate. And one of his first one is Apricot Charm down there on the right. And the other one he named after his mother, Lady O. And that's a very popular hardy plant that grows not just in the cold climate, but also in the wider community. He developed New Blood, an apricot tingle, and a cream passion, which isn't his plant, but it's a plant that was developed here in Sydney by Nathan Kirkwood from Gymea, and he didn't know what to do with it. It's again the same situation. Lovely plant, but he's not a nurseryman, and so it's going nowhere. So I sent it across to Peter, and he thought that'd be a good plant to grow, and I think it is too. I think it's an absolutely beautiful plant, and he grows it for sale. Cream Passion. So there are 20 cultivars released through Bywong Nursery. I've listed them there, and I can supply you with those names, probably not worth dwelling. But what's interesting is that the plant down the bottom there is Hills Jubilee, was Hills Grammar School in Sydney. We're looking for a plant to commemorate their Jubilee. And now I believe this sort of thing's going to become a little bit more popular because it's not the first time, but other people have followed it and selected plants from various breeders who often have plants that they don't develop for one reason or another, but they're there and can be used for various purposes. I'm sure that some of those you would know, and some of them you won't. But for people interested, it's worth having. And a couple of other oddies have been developed but not really run with properly. I'm sorry, they were bred by individuals or were seedlings that came up outside the nursery industry. One's blood orange, which is a really beautiful plant. It's got PBR on it. And PBR is a bit of a blessing or non-blessing, depending on how you look at it. You often find that plants that are under PBR just disappear. And the terms of reference are too onerous, A, because the plants can be difficult to propagate, and B, nobody else is allowed to propagate it, and therefore they don't propagate it. They just propagate something else. So unless it's a really good plant, PBR is not the way to go, in my view. The other one, Bull-Eye Beauty, of course, that's entered the cut flower industry and is a very lovely plant. It's a seedling that came up at Grebelia Park down in Bull-Eye. And the one below it is Birdsong, another seedling of honey gem. Both of those orangey yellow ones came from honey gem, just seedlings. And Birdsong is a prime case in point. It was PBR and now you can't buy it anywhere. This is a plant called Just Rosy. These are oddies. Just Rosy. It was propagated there for a while by a wholesale tube nursery, but they've gone out of business and I never see that anywhere now. I've got a plant of it. And Canning Classic, which is a natural hybrid from the Canning Highwood by members of the study group, a really beautiful plant, but a beast of a thing to propagate and also to graft. So, yeah, I've got a plant of that, but it's being maintained because it is a lovely plant, but it's a challenge. And Wendy Sunshine, Neil Marriott, my co-author, does a bit of breeding. Again, what he does is he picks a seed off his first germinate them and sees what he gets. So Wendy Sunshine was a hybrid, an unusual hybrid, the colour of the flowers, and it's from a Western Australian plant, Grebelia thursoides, subspecies pustulata. All right, so now there was I forgot his name, I should have looked it up, a guy in Queensland who brought out a whole lot of plants that were alleged to be dwarf grevilleas, which didn't look to be dwarf. They were already 1.5 meters when they were being sold, and everybody shaking their head, go, don't think so. They went under various names, but their proper name was, one of them was Wattlebird Yellow, and one of them Silver Eye Cream, and Autumn Waterfall, the three of them. And the surprise was that the plants did not grow big. They grew beautifully and low in about 1 meter, 1.5 meters, maximum 2, and dense flowering, just the most beautiful colours. And you don't see them very often now, but I'm hopeful that they haven't been lost because they're really wonderful plants for the garden, as you can see. And a couple of other odds was, one is Radiant Pink. I'm not sure where that came from, but it's being grown at Mole Station Nursery now. Very, very beautiful plant. And Just Peachy, what a funny name. And of course, Just Rosy is its sister, came up in the same garden. And Rosemary's Choice, that's a plant from New South Wales that is the most beautiful plant. It's based on Winpara gem. And I had it in my garden and it didn't flower. So I went up and saw them and said, well, how can you sell this plant? I said, well, we sell a lot of it. Where? They said, oh, into cold country areas like, into Canberra and places that get cold winters. So unfortunately, it's not going to be a winter in Sydney. How's our time going? Because 4:20. Okay, I'll try and finish in 10 minutes. This is a man that you don't know. It's Richard Tomkin. He used to run Changes Green Nursery. Richard Tomkin is really a breeder of plants. He would be, outside of Digby, probably the best that we've ever seen in this country, and he's still going. He has a a very amusing vernacular, and the names of his plants are very intriguing often. Well, let's go look at this one on the top right, Grevillea lollipops. And he said the correct way to spell that is with the exclamation mark, so don't leave it out. Okay, all right, Richard. And of course, he's got Billy Bonkers, which he named after his dog. It was chasing its tail around his feet one day, and he said, "Billy, you're going bonkers." And they thought that's a good name for a plant. And quite a number of his plants, Orange Wow. Well, that is a nice plant, but that's a funny name, I think. And anyway, we're going to go through a few of his plants. I can possibly go through them all, but they're all worthy. And one of the best he's got, he said that he sells more labels of this than any other, is Flamingo, Grevillea Flamingo on the left there, and it is a beautiful plant. Very floriferous, doesn't get very tall, big flowers, and very, very showy. You could put 5 of them in a row and you wouldn't be disappointed in the result. Grevillea Lana Marie, named after his wife, and that frequently gets mixed up with Billy Bonkers. They look very similar, and it's got Grevillea Nana from Western Australia in its heritage. But Lana Marie is a big spreading plant, around about 5 metres wide, and it arches, the branches arch over. And if you were to see that in his garden or anywhere that gives it the proper room, you would have no question in saying that's one of the best plants in the garden. It's a really lovely, lovely plant. And underneath it, he's got this new release, which he calls Grevillea Bigfoot. Bigfoot is the longest flower he's ever seen in a Grevillea. And it won't guarantee that it'll do that in Sydney, but it's certainly worth. It is quite a different plant. Flowers aren't quite as big, but the inflorescence is enormous. Lime and soda is another plant. Doesn't like the cold climate, but a really pretty plant. Down the bottom is another one. He's called Flat As, and that's quite a nice plant. It's not a good ground cover though. I don't think. You can see how more open it is than. But it probably has potential as a Grevillea standard. And then Muffin is up there on the right. Cherry Pie, which looks very much like Long John, but it has much darker flowers. And Orange Wow up to the right. And Bush Lemons, which is the deepest yellow that I've ever seen. It's just brilliant colour. Miami Pink, I love Miami Pink. Lovely ferny foliage and deep pink flowers. Just a glorious plant. Someone's got their phone there. And Geisha. Geisha is one of the parents he didn't release, although he released it. He sent it to Fairhill. Half a dozen plants were propagated and they sold them, and I got one. And he said, I didn't release that. And they said, well, yeah, you did. You gave us da-da-da. Oh, he said, that's not right. Anyway, it's too late now, Richard. It's already happened. So Geisha is the parent of Flamingo, one of them. And it's got a similar flower colour to what's it called? I've just got the name now. Because it's the other parent. Like the parent is of this is Moonlight, and it's crossed with Robin Gordon, I think, and so you get this colour, and it's the same colour whether you have the parent Robin Gordon or the parent Moonlight. One of the plants, though, that he did release is Grebelia Super Duper, and I didn't like this plant when it first came out. It was grafted. He grafts all his plants, and I think he made a mistake. There's a certain degree of incompatibility. But the thing is, this plant only grows about knee high, and that's a plant that people are very keen to get hold of, and anything that flowers like this is really, really top drawer. And so you do see this around in the nurseries now. Somebody's decided that it's going to grow better on its own roots. And and it's growing beautifully in our garden at the farm. Just a little ground cover, almost like a border plant, you know. It's a lovely plant. Think about that one anyway. Gosh, I just skipped over, I can't go back, unfortunately. I skipped over Peaches and Cream. Peaches and Cream is one of those real winners, a one-off that came up in Jan Glazebrook's garden in Brisbane, and they propagated it and got it into cultivation. You don't see it, unfortunately. It's a PBR plant, and the person that's got control of it is not exactly somebody you would want to deal with. So unfortunately, not many people propagate it. It's easy to propagate though. I can tell you that much. And the guy you're looking at is Digby Grounds. This is the guy from Western Australia that is changing. These are all new hybrids that are coming. And there's 4 of them I think have been got to Sydney, and I'm taking some down to the Grebelia study group meeting next weekend. I managed to get 5 or 6, and they're trickling through. I don't know why, but they're really lovely plants. This is Scarlet Moon, which we've had that around for a while. But the one on the top right there is Tangerine Dream, which is a beautiful, interesting colour. And that's just come into Sydney. And the one on below it, Raspberry Dream, they've got a bit of a problem with the naming here. I mean, I think 5 of them have got the word dream in the name, and a couple more have got the word moon in the name. I'm not sure whether they're having a bad day. There's Aphrodite's Dream there, and then Gelato Dream on the right, which looks a bit like Peaches and Cream, doesn't it? And the one in the bottom left was a plant that was taken up by the RSL in Western Australia for Anzac Day Memorial. And he gave them this thing called Spirit of Anzac. Finished. Oh, how about that? I can go back. One more. Enough. I did want to show you this one though. This is Jan Glazebrook's plant, Peaches and Cream. She also brought in Kimberley Gold, and there's another one too, Woburn One, which I didn't have on this screen. So you've had your fill, 430. I think that's more than enough for today. And like, I don't know how many I've put up there. It would be less than 100, and there's over 600. So a big challenge to kind of introduce this subject and even talk about it in any meaningful way. So I've elected to take a bit of history tour, as well as focus on the people that have done the major work, a lot of the major work in introducing these plants to horticulture.